Welcome to Property Question Time. This is the programme where you can get your property-related questions answered by our expert panel. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me today are Paul Mahoney, MD of Nova Financial Group. Welcome to you. Aisha Afori, founder of Propel, Accomplished Property Investors and Developers. Welcome to you. And John Howard, property developer, author, and of course investor angel on PTV's Property Elevator Show. Welcome, John. Our first question today is going to Paul, and Paul, your question is this. I recently moved house and have let my previous property using a buy-to-let mortgage. Unfortunately, there's a lot of maintenance to be done on that property, and with hindsight, I should have borrowed more. Is it possible to increase the mortgage without applying for a completely new loan?
Okay, all right. It's a good question. I suppose that there's a couple of things that probably need to be clarified there before I can give the right answer, but I'll give both scenarios. Sometimes when people let their old home, sorry, did they say they bought a new property?
They bought a new property and they've let their old one.
Okay, all right. So there's two different ways that can be done. Sometimes people get a consent to let, which means you keep your original mortgage on that previous property. But usually, because they bought a new one and assume they've taken a residential mortgage on that new one, they would have switched it over to a buy-to-let anyway.
Yep.
And as they said, they borrowed a certain amount. So far as getting more from that same lender, some lenders will allow you to do that. They will give you a sort of an extension of your mortgage if you like, but that's not always the best option either. They shouldn't just look at that as, I assume the reason they're probably thinking of doing that is they think it might be less costly. So without incurring fees such as valuations and arrangement fees and things. But quite often the initial lender will charge you those things anyway. The question would be, why didn't they borrow the maximum amount of what they were going to need initially? Also, the fact that they're saying there's maintenance, borrowing money to do maintenance on a property maybe isn't the best way of doing things either, because essentially they're taking capital from their property to maintain something on an ongoing basis. So that's going to run out at a certain point, likely, unless they're talking about a renovation. So the answer is they should speak to an independent broker, really. Get an idea of their situation, what they need, and then find a product that's fit for purpose.
I suppose the difficulty is renovation works while the new tenants are in there. That's going to be rather difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's going to be difficult to quantify what that'll do to the rental once they've done it, whether
Exactly.
It's an obligation.
There's a few things to clarify there. With any sort of mortgage situation, you need to get an understanding of that full picture. And it's always somewhat difficult when you're getting a tiny little snapshot of that to provide the best answer.
Okay, Aisha, any comments on that?
I think I just second that. Speaking to a broker will give anybody a good opportunity to understand, what's available in the market and, what mortgage is suitable for, what's going on at the time.
I presume it's also going to be cheaper than applying for a separate loan to do these things. If you go to normal finance houses, they're going to be rather more expensive than your original mortgage lender.
Not necessarily. You'd be surprised. And sometimes you can actually speak to a broker and they won't charge you. They'll get paid their fees on the other side. So there's not really any, downside to you speaking to a broker, and you might as well hear what, opportunities and what's available.
Okay, John, anything?
Well, you may not be surprised, Stephen, for me to say that they need to think about all this in advance, anticipate what needs to be spent, and really I haven't got a lot of sympathy for them, surprisingly, because they should have thought about all this. It's a big job. If you're investing in a property, you've got to look at the long term and what's going to need to be done, and probably phase that in over a number of years, because it's maintenance at the end of the day. But you need to recognise that before you take out your loan.
Well, it's the same thing that comes up time and time again on the programme, isn't it? Fail to plan to fail.
Absolutely, completely.
And also take good stock of what your professional advisors are going to.
Exactly, very much so.
And not thinking of property as a hobby. A lot of people just end up accidental landlords and think, I'm just going to keep this property.
Spot on.
That's not what it is.
No, property's a business. How many times do we have to say on this programme? Property is a serious business. There's a lot of money involved.
Yeah. Okay, Aisha, your question. Now, I'm guessing this is coming from somebody who wants to start on the path to property development. Their question is, what are the first rules of property development? There you go.
Yeah. Big question. The first thing that I would say is team. You need to have the right team around you. And if you don't have prior experience, it's particularly important, because how are you going to, for example, get financing? Or how are you going to know certain pitfalls to avoid and what you need to do? So I say whether or not you have experience, you need a great team. If you don't have experience, it's even more important. And by team, I mean, an architect, a surveyor, a solicitor, a builder, could even be engineers, depending on what project you're doing. That would be the sort of very first thing that I would think about. Beyond that, it would then be, what is your property development strategy? Property development is a very broad term. What exactly do you plan to be developing? What areas, for example?
Okay, fine. Paul, would you consider yourself to be part of the sort of strategic planning of a development?
Yeah, well, absolutely. It kind of ties into the previous point, doesn't it? And I do agree with everything that was said there. I think far too many people watch certain TV shows and things and think, well, it's easy. You can make loads of money in property
Just go
development.
to the auction and
But keeping in mind, it's a profession. And you need to have a strategy and you need to approach things in the right way. You can't just say, well, I'm going to be a property developer overnight, go and buy a plot and all of a sudden make £1 million. There's a lot more to it than that. It's like any other business, like we just said, having a strategy, actually finding, if you don't know what you're doing, well, that's not necessarily the end of the world, but finding people that do and surrounding yourself with those people and maybe considering the fact that on your first deal, you might not make a lot of money. Or, just to get a bit of experience, I would say, for that person is quite important.
Okay, and John, do you have a single golden rule?
I've got a lot to say on this subject, having done it for 40 years. I mean, it amazes me the amount of people who want to be a property developer or an investor with no experience. It's quite a dangerous thing to do. And of course, the more money they have to invest to start with, the more excited they become. So I always think that, again, surround yourself with the best people. If those people make you better than you, that's great. Brilliant. I'm always delighted to have the best people around me and to make me look, sometimes they make me look better as well, which is great. And it's so important to do your research and be realistic about your prices and the value you think they're going to be worth at the end of the project when they're finished. And don't just take what an agent says. Make your own decisions. Agents are normally 10% higher than they should be, probably, because as we said on this programme before, when estate agents, if it's residential, opens the curtains in the morning, it's always a sunny day. And that's what you've got to remember.
I mean, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And I think
sure.
that's what a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate.
Yeah, agreed.
So.
Okay, great. John, your question.
Good.
Bit complicated, I'm afraid.
Oh. Yeah.
I live in a small rural community where we've been designated for additional housing. The estate should meet then the needs of the local council's quota. The entrance to the estate will be about 50 yards from my drive. The road is currently a 40-mile-an-hour road, but due to there being no other pedestrian access to the estate, road calming is being introduced with a single-file gate right outside my house. I anticipate queues of traffic outside my house, problems with the access and probable devaluation of the property. Is there anything I can do to have the road calming plans moved, or who should I contact? That's a nice easy one for you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm glad I'm getting paid. Well, the first thing to say is your local councillor. So a lot of people think, well, why is it worth me bothering to vote in the local elections? And this is a prime example where it is. So the local councillor, that's the first person to go to if there's an issue and a problem. Go and see your local councillor, explain the situation to them. They will then get on to the chairman of the local parish, who will then hopefully get on to the county council, who will then get on to the roads department, transport department, and see if it can be moved or something can be done. So when people say, oh, it's not worth voting at the local elections, it's really important because they're local issues and this is a local issue.
Okay. Aisha, anything to add to that?
I'd say possibly see whoever else in the the neighbourhood feels the same way, because if there are more of you, it's likely to carry more weight, I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. How accessible are the councils on this sort of thing?
Very, very accessible. They're there to help. They're there to. By the way, as is the local MP, of course. People say, "Oh, he's an MP." Go and see them, because they're there to help you. They're being paid to help you. So go and see them. Same with the local authority, the council. All these people are available, but you have to use them.
Yeah, I mean, they're quite devastating, this really, although the question really sounds quite simple. Can I just move some sort of gated slowdown area? But I mean, it can have quite a devastating effect on the property. Would it devalue it much?
I think it could, unfortunately, yes. And there's really nothing you can really do about that in terms of the down valuation. You can't get any money back from anybody for it, unfortunately. All you can try and do is work with the community. Work with the local authority and the council and see if you can mitigate it in some way.
It's quite interesting actually. A lot of the questions that we get about councils and planning departments, people almost sort of treat them as the enemy, don't they? And actually, they're usually quite receptive and helpful.
They're actually, they're your friends, and they're free. Yeah. So use it.
That's all we have time for in this half of the programme. We're going to go to a commercial break now. Join us again shortly.
Property is a great investment option, but it's one of the largest purchases that you'll ever make. As individuals, we're all limited by our resources, and regardless of our experience, knowledge or time, we can achieve much more with the help of a qualified team and extra resources being available. Nova Financial specialise in assisting clients to achieve financial freedom through property investment. With over 100 years of experience, we shape your family's future. To invest in property with absolute confidence, call us on 0203 8600 or visit nova.financial.
The tax system has evolved significantly over recent years for property investors and developers. You may think that you and your accountant have a grip on these changes. However, unless you're receiving specialist tax advice from a specialist tax advisory firm, then it's unlikely to be the case. At ETC Tax, our team of highly experienced chartered tax advisors work with private individuals and companies to deliver effective tax planning whilst meeting HMRC compliance requirements. Let us help you to meet your personal or commercial objectives in the most tax-efficient manner. ETC Tax, making the complex simple.
My name is John Howard, and I've been investing and developing properties for over 40 years. In that time, I've been very successful, but of course I've always made the odd mistake as well. In my book, I explain how to be successful and what to do should something go wrong. I've survived 3 property recessions. I can help you do the same. My book is available online. Please go to johnhowardpropertyexpert.co.uk.
If you've got a question about property, why not ask an expert? Property Question Time gives you the opportunity to ask anything you want, whether it's about planning, finance, conveyancing, moving abroad, literally anything that's property related. The Property TV panel of experts are available to answer your questions no matter how complex they may seem. Simply email your question to info@propertytelevision.tv and join us on Sky Channel 189 to hear your questions answered.
Welcome back to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me are Paul Mahoney, Aisha Afori and John Howard. Welcome back, guys. Paul, your question for this second half is, I am 50 years old and want to start a property portfolio to pass on to my children. Given my age, how long a period could I get a buy-to-let mortgage for? And in percentage terms, how much could I borrow per property?
Good question. Very common, people are starting out at that age, and to be honest, in buy-to-let terms, that's not an old age at all. The reason for that is buy-to-let mortgages are considered commercial mortgages. The serviceability for those mortgages is predominantly the rent from the properties themselves, as opposed to a residential mortgage, which is the home you live in, and therefore it's very associated with your personal income. So, you know, if you're borrowing at 50 to buy a residential home, then you probably would be somewhat limited regarding the time frame as compared to someone that's 30 years of age. With buy-to-let, that person wouldn't really be limited at all. Some lenders will lend to you up to the age of 100, So a very common thing actually is that people do assume that given their age, and even at the age of 60, 65, 70, and even above that, you can still get buy-to-let mortgages over a decent term period. So for that person, it's not something to worry about at all. And in fact, they've got quite a bit of time on their side to enable them to start building a portfolio even prior to retirement. They've got 15 years. So the time frame isn't so much of a concern. How much they'd be able to borrow is based upon two things, serviceability and loan to value. So most lenders, what I call the average maximum that lenders will go to is 75%. The reason for that term, and I think I coined it, is that's where lenders will go to while still offering decent interest rates. So at the moment you can borrow 75% at about 2 or 3% interest rates. You can go above that, but the rates become higher. If you're a bit below that, sometimes the rates are a bit cheaper, but not substantially cheaper. And because buy-to-let mortgages they're cheap money, usually it's worth having them. So 75% loan to value is what most lenders will go to. The other thing to consider is serviceability, which mostly only limits you if you're buying lower yielding properties. Geographically, that has affected the London and the South East pretty much, in that last year the Bank of England mandated that all buy-to-let lenders needed to use a benchmark rate of 5.5%, meaning that even if they're lending to you at 2%, they need to stress test it at 5.5%. Now there are some ways around that, but in general that's the rule. So that means if your yield is below about 4.5%, 5%, that could limit your ability to borrow up to 75%.
Paul, you mentioned yield there was a critical part of deciding the percentage. So I presume, London properties, for instance, where you've got a whole plethora of properties over £1 million or so, the actual yield must go rocketing down, especially if you take into things like some of the service charges that people here
absolutely,
are paying.
Good point. They do actually consider costs of that. And you're right, in the past, London has grown substantially, but of course, past performance is an indication of future performance. So, with that change that came into place, a lot of people are struggling to borrow what they could before, in not just London, but the South East, any high value, low yielding property. And that's actually benefiting areas with lower values and higher yields, because you can still borrow as much as you want, as much as you could before, and therefore, sometimes it's a better use of the money.
Okay, Aisha.
I'd say just on that, speak to again a mortgage broker. So get a variety of different ideas from different lenders.
I suppose to some extent your informed mortgage broker these days has almost replaced your expert building society manager of years ago.
Totally, Stephen. You and I remember the bank manager. You go and see them and you sit down, you have a cup of tea, and he'd say, "Where is it?" and you'd say, "Where it is?" And in principle, you get an agreement.
Well, he knew more about you than you did.
He did,
to some
absolutely.
Extent. He knew
which
where
is
you
probably,
worked.
in certain cases, quite disturbing.
Yes.
But that's how it worked. And you're absolutely right. The mortgage broker has taken the place of the bank manager completely. And there's some really good mortgage brokers out there. And as we said before, to start with, get your team together. And one of the most important parts of your team is the mortgage broker.
Yep. And you could even speak to more than one initially. If you speak to a mortgage broker and you find that you don't particularly gel very well, speak to a couple until you find somebody that fit. I think as well as the advice, it's also about the relationship.
Okay, all right. Aisha, your question. Yes. Right, this is a good one. I can see John jumping in on this one too. What is the most common mistake made by property developers?
Well, again, it comes down to, I'd say, experience. But I think I've seen I see a couple of things. Do your due diligence. Do your homework. You need to know the area. You need to know the type of development that you're proposing to build. Is it suitable for the area? Have you looked at your numbers? Have you factored in a large enough contingency? Nobody can predict the future. What happens if the market falls? What happens if it takes a bit longer to sell the end units if you're selling and you can't pay back your investors? You have to have a plan A, a plan B, C, D, and E. And most people, or a lot of people, don't necessarily have so many different paths to go down if things don't go according to plan.
And I suppose, again, this is a case of developing a good relationship with your sort of local agent, I suppose, in the area that you want to develop.
Absolutely. I think that's important because the agents are obviously on the ground. So if it's not an area that you live in, for example, then going to speak to different agents and getting their viewpoints absolutely is a critical part of your overall sort of due diligence. But I think that it's a responsibility of the developer to make sure that they understand the specific dynamics of that area, and then how anything that may go on in the sort of wider scope of property market could affect that, and have contingencies in place.
John, you develop in all sorts of different areas.
We do, yeah. Okay, 3 things. First of all, they underestimate the cost of the works. That's the first thing most people do. Second, they estimate the length of time it will take to do. And the third thing, they overestimate what the sales are going to be worth at the end, unless the market is increasing, of course, it's rapidly going up. And they're the 3 most common things. And even if they're 5% wrong or 10% wrong in each one of those, it makes a huge amount of difference. You've really got to be conservative. Really got to be conservative on your... And if the deal doesn't work because you're conservative, walk away from it. Go and find one that does. People seem to get in their idea, I'm buying it, especially auction, I'm buying it almost at any cost. I've done all the research and I've spent all this time and I waste 95% of my time, literally, looking at deals and not doing them. But it's the 5% I do that more than pay for the ones I don't do. And that's the key.
And I suppose also these potential mistakes over time and material costs can affect your drawdown from your lenders, which is in turn going to affect the sort of confidence they've got in you, effectively.
Absolutely. Under promise and over deliver every time.
And I think in a rising market, it can be quite easy to find something and have it work well. But when things turn...
Yeah, you can mask it, can't you?
Exactly. So you can mask it in a rising market. Exactly. But when things turn, that's what separates, those who are experienced from those who aren't.
For sure.
And then what do you do? So at the moment, I've seen a lot of people sort of, doing developments, not necessarily very experienced or not putting in as many contingencies or doing things as you would think. And it works now, but it might not in future.
It may not work in 6 months or 3 months.
Exactly.
And of course, and do they work out all their interest, all the stamp duty, legal fees, sales? Half of them don't even do that. It's crazy.
And there's actually one other interesting thing that I've come across is that sometimes, particularly for newer developers, they're not necessarily very familiar with the FCA rules and regulations about how to raise funding into their developments, in terms of how you can and cannot pool assets from different investors. So that's something that I think that a lot of people should pay more attention to.
Okay.
For sure.
Great.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
John,
yes.
your final question. I want to change one large bedroom into an ensuite into 2 small ones, one of which would keep the ensuite. Access to the second bedroom would be by going through the first bedroom. Is that legal?
Well, first of all, if it's a house, it is legal. It's your own home. In the old days, when they had those terrace houses, quite often you did have to walk through one bedroom to get to the upstairs, to get to the next bedroom, to get to the bathroom. And most people have now put a landing in and some sort, hallway in of some sort. So I'm not sure it's going to put a lot of value on the property if it's it should do technically because it goes from a 1 bedroom to a 2 bedroom. But if you've got to walk through one bedroom to get to the other, it's almost more of a landing these days, isn't it, than a bedroom, I would say.
I suppose the only complication could be in a block of flats you might fall foul of the distance between the furthest bedroom and the nearest fire exit.
Yes, I agree with that, but I'm assuming it's a house by the sound of things. Yeah, okay. But you could, if it's a flat, there's other things to consider, yeah.
Yeah, Aisha.
I think if it's a residence, for somebody and they're planning to live in it, then it's not necessarily the end of the world. But if you may think about selling it in future, then how appealing would that be to somebody else?
Well, you can always put it back.
Yeah.
You can always put it back to how it was.
I guess, if you factor in those costs. Yeah.
Yep.
Although that can be a costly exercise that you don't want at the point of sale.
Yeah, but if it suits you, and it might just suit you for whatever reason, and so on. I mean, everyone has a different circumstances. Yeah.
Again, Paul, I suppose these sort of alterations could have some effect when you come to sell the property and the next person's trying to finance it.
I think it kind of does tie into the underlying theme we've been discussing about strategy and end goal. You know, what is this person trying to do? Are they going to rent the place?
He wants 2 bedrooms.
Well, he wants 2 bedrooms, but why does he want a second bedroom? Because if he's planning to rent the second bedroom, well, that person's not going to want someone walking through their bedroom all the time.
I think, to be fair, it sounds like to me that it's a family home.
It's a family home.
And they want to create another bedroom, and then, you know.
As I said, if it's for them to stay in,
It's
absolutely fine. If it's we want to create a second bedroom to add value and then sell,
it's not going to add value.
Exactly.
Probably, won't do that.
All right. Ladies and gents, thank you very much. That's all we've got time for now. So, Paul Mahoney, thank you. Aisha Afori, thank you very much on your first programme today. Well done. And John Howard, thank you again for giving your expertise. That's all we have time for today. So join us again next time on Property Question Time.
If you have any questions you'd like to send to the experts at Property Question Time, you can submit them via our website, on social media, or email us on info@propertytelevision.co.uk.
Property is a great investment option, but it's one of the largest purchases that you'll ever make. As individuals, we're all limited by our resources, and regardless of our experience, knowledge or time, we can achieve much more with the help of a qualified team and extra resources being available. Nova Financial specialise in assisting clients to achieve financial freedom through property investment. With over 100 years of experience, we shape your family's future. To invest in property with absolute confidence, call us on 0203 8600 or visit nova.financial.
The tax system has evolved significantly over recent years for property investors and developers. You may think that you and your accountant have a grip on these changes. However, unless you're receiving specialist tax advice from a specialist tax advisory firm, then it's unlikely to be the case. At ETC Tax, our team of highly experienced chartered tax advisors work with private individuals and companies to deliver effective tax planning whilst meeting HMRC compliance requirements. Let us help you to meet your personal or commercial objectives in the most tax-efficient manner. ETC Tax, making the complex simple.
Hi, I'm John Howard, and I'm known as the property expert. The reason for this is over the last 40 odd years, I've bought and sold over 3,500 properties, and I'm still going. I'm delighted to pass on my vast experience and knowledge to you through my property seminars that are taking place across the UK this year. To know more, please go to johnhowardpropertyexpert.co.uk.
If you've got a question about property, why not ask an expert? Property Question Time gives you the opportunity to ask anything you want, whether it's about planning, finance, conveyancing, moving abroad, literally anything that's property related. The Property TV panel of experts are available to answer your questions no matter how complex they may seem. Simply email your question to info@propertytelevision.tv and join us on Sky Channel 189 to hear your questions answered. Proper Wealth covers all areas of wealth creation with a specific focus on property. Hosted by international property finance expert Paul Mahoney, the show invites industry experts to share their wealth of knowledge with viewers. From topics that include buy-to-let, tax, portfolio management, finance and planning, to hot investment spots and conveyancing, Proper Wealth covers it all. Proper Wealth, exclusive to Property TV.